We are not doctors. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as medical advice. Consult your physician before starting any workout routine. This is the Martial Heart Podcast.
Hey, hello everybody and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to do two podcasts. I'm going to do two episodes today, but they're not going to be both on the heart condition. We're going to do one on the Heart Attack Diary, the regular podcast, and then I'm going to do this one. We're going to call it Conspiracy Show 1 because there's a lot going on in the world today, and it's right inside my wheelhouse. You may not know this if you haven't researched me at all, but I am a writer. I've been a writer for a number of years, and I wrote a series of articles years ago called Patriot Deception, The Patriot Deception. And it's all happening in front of everybody's face right now. And it's things that I warned people about 9 years ago. Now, I'm not going to say I was the only one, but I think I was one of the people trying to make the biggest stink out of all of it. But years and years ago, it was fairly easy to see once, people started looking into it that the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, and probably other people, including perhaps the Cubans, were influencing what at the time we referred to as the alt-right or the right wing. And those would be organizations, everything from the NRA to the Proud Boys to the Oath Keepers, InfoWars, and Prison Planet, and all of these other media organizations and groups of people that aligned themselves with the far right. And what a lot of us referred to as the Patriot Movement. So in early 2015, a friend of mine who was a retired Army Special Forces intelligence guy asked me if I had been looking into any of this. And at the time I said no. So he said, would you? He asked if I would. And I said, sure. And it literally took me about a couple of days to verify that what he thought was going on actually was going on. And then I started digging a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper, and I wrote a series of articles about it called The Patriot Deception. There's an introduction. There's two different articles on how they're manipulating the media. There's articles about specific individuals. And most of them really concentrating on InfoWars and Alex Jones and the people around him, because at the time he was a huge influence, and everyone from Ron Paul and all the other more libertarian kind of figures and people who were considered rebellious, against the resistance. They were resisting, the mainstream. And, of course, at the time, Alex Jones was spending a lot of time on RT, or Russia Today, being interviewed, and pretty much doing a shitty job of representing the United States and how things are happening here. But what was happening was Russia was influencing media perceptions and manipulating the minds of the American voters. They didn't have to do it with very much covert action. They didn't have to really do this clandestinely because there were so many available and willing, useful idiots that they could simply influence or pay to, just tout the Russian line. And it got worse and worse after 2014 when Russia invaded Ukraine. A lot of people, they're like, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. No, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. So Russia and Ukraine have been at war for 10 years. And Russia just announced that we're invading Ukraine 2 years ago. They actually did it 10 years ago. They captured Crimea, took Crimea away from Ukraine. And that was done 10 years ago. And they've been fighting ever since. And so after the invasion of Ukraine in 2014, it got even worse because it seemed like world lines were being drawn along this border between Ukraine and Russia. And so Russia has a very long, more than 100 years, well over 100-year history of using what they refer to as active measures against their enemies and adversaries and opponents, and manipulating their politics, their public perceptions, their media, and things like that. It's been going on for a very long time. And it's something that's very well known within the intelligence community, and now it's finally becoming well known within the news organizations and within media. But it has taken a long time for everyone to catch up. So it's been a little disheartening for people like me who've been talking about it for years, because no one actually listened. And yeah, my articles that I posted on my website were read by a couple of million people, or at least they were accessed a couple of million times. How many times the Russians were reading them, I have no idea. And my research, my compiled information was passed along to the necessary authorities. It was passed on to the FBI, for instance. It was passed on to the NSA, I know of for a fact. And it was handed out and discussed at different conferences for intelligence representatives. But nobody talked to me about it. Nobody interviewed me about it. And a couple of years later, when it started leaking into the media and people were going to talk about the Russia collusion thing, nobody came to talk to me about it, because the reality of what it was isn't what everyone wanted it to be. So it didn't fit their narrative to have me come on and discuss it. So, that's where everything was for years. I even wrote a novel called Patriot Deception, based on the research that I had done, and it was kind of fun. It was pretty popular for a while, and it was a fairly accurate, it was a fictionalized account of the things that are done and how they're done. But it was the original articles, a series of articles called The Patriot Deception, that were on my old website. They're currently on my current website, openresourcesllc.com. Some of them are. The entire series isn't on there. It's kind of whenever something relevant has hit the news, I've moved some of these older articles over to the new website. Just kind of as a means of, hey, we talked about this a decade ago. Here's an article, talking about that. And it was very frustrating for me. I'll be honest with you. It was very frustrating at the time because no one would listen. The people who did listen were people within the intelligence community and people within, the government and people in media organizations who specifically tracked things like misinformation, disinformation, and, Russian active measures. But mainstream media ignored it. And there was actually an attempt by, get this, the Republican Party to censor it and to silence it and to prevent it from wider distribution. And that's something I may go into in a future episode of the Conspiracy Show version of this podcast. And I don't know, we may branch out and do a completely different podcast just for those types of topics. But they used a legal means, I didn't say illegal, they used a legal means to stop distribution of my research and my articles. And it's kind of a complicated legal hoop thing that, maybe I'll have a lawyer on and we can discuss it. But it was crooked as fuck, if you want to know the bottom line of it. But they wanted to make sure that information stayed, kind of muffled until after the 2016 election. And after that, it was too late. And then, we tried to get the information out there and remind everyone of it in 2020, before the 2020 election, because the same things were happening. They were still happening. They had never stopped. And nobody listened then either. So it's really hard to get people to listen to things that they don't want to believe are happening, because in all honesty, even going back to 1990, 1991, 92, 93, I started hearing things like, hey, Russia's our friend now. The Soviet Union dissolved, and Russia is our friend. They're an ally now. Well, no, they're not. They never have been. Russia has never been our ally. You can go back into the 1800s and analyze Russia's relationship and their approach to the West, and specifically to the United States, and realize that, Russia's never been our friend. And I know people like to rewrite history. People like to manipulate thoughts on history and what really happened. And a lot of people, you'll hear it all the time, the Soviet Union won World War II. No, they didn't, actually. They helped. They didn't win it. And if they were that good at having wars, first of all, they would have kicked Ukraine's ass by now, and they haven't done it. And second of all, they lost more people during World War II than anyone. So not so good at the whole war thing. But, they helped. They were supposedly on the side of the good guys. But that was after they had already been on the side of the Nazis, when they helped the Nazis invade Poland. They had an agreement. They had a treaty with Hitler before they decided to change sides. So there's a long history about it. And I was a Cold War guy. I was born in the middle of the Cold War. I was a Cold War soldier when I first enlisted in the military. And yes, I was bred, I was trained, I was educated to distrust and dislike the Soviets and, by extension, the Russians. And it was all warranted. It really was. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think it was just Cold War rhetoric and propaganda. But a lot of the things that the Soviet Union and then Russia and the Russian Federation afterward, they're pure evil things. And they had very little concept of caring who they were injuring. Like them lying, spreading false propaganda, active measures against the West and the United States in Africa during the AIDS epidemic. Probably upwards of 1 million people died because of what the Soviets did during the AIDS epidemic by spreading propaganda that was telling people that the West was actually giving people AIDS and HIV at the treatment clinics, not treating it. And so millions of people didn't, or, I don't even think they have an actual number, but a lot of people didn't seek treatment from those Western clinics that were trying to save lives in Africa. Because the Soviets were lying to them and telling them that, if you go there, they're going to give you AIDS and you're going to die. So now, conspiracy show number 1, what's old is new again, and we're back to square one with the Patriot deception from almost 10 years ago now. But we're going to talk about it. So this will be introduction, conspiracy show introduction. And we'll be back to talk about it some more. Until then, take care of yourselves. Go eat right and get some exercise.